And this is Brian. Brian. I think he deserves an applause too. Without him, we would be lost here. Dear sisters, and I may say brothers, feel included, as you wish. It is great to be here. Thank you for the warm welcome. Thank you for inviting us to this space. It is really a privilege to be here. I must say, some of us have been dreaming of such a conference for a long time. Because we always thought, well, all these Mennonites do so many great things around the world. They are known for their peace-building projects in universities, in some activities, in advocacy work, in politics. But these Mennonites usually find themselves very isolated and disconnected to some other Mennonites. So why don't we bring together people, Mennonites, and have a Mennonite peace-building conference? That would be great. So here we are, and this is really, really wonderful. Thank you so much for organizing this. I will not name you all, but I mean, you have been in touch with these women, with these sisters, and they have helped us immensely to get here. Thank you so much. I'm filled with this feeling of gratefulness, so I want to invite you just for a moment of prayer before I start. God of life, God of justice and peace, we thank you for this space, a space that you have created, that you have provided, that you have prepared. You invite us into your wisdom of peace with justice. Bless us as we encounter with each other, as we learn from each other, as we listen from each other, as we share. Walk with us through the coming hours and days, and bless this university, all the people that are studying here together in order to find out more about your wisdom of peace building. Amen. Thank you. Well, it's great to be here, and I must say I've only been here for now almost 24 hours, and it already feels like, yeah, it's worth it. We don't really need a program. You know, this is the thing with Mennonite conferences. You don't really have to set up a program, but you know, meeting some of you, being able to talk to you, seeing friends again, getting to know new people, even in the shared bathroom that we have in the morning. You know, you cannot talk peace all the time here. So it's really great. But of course, we are looking forward to the program as well. Now, I want to talk a little bit. 15 minutes. That's the maximum. I don't see oh, there's a clock. Well, Marlene will remind us here that we keep time. 15 minutes, as you have seen. This is very, very, very limited. I will try my best to follow that. I'm invited to speak a bit about Anabaptist peace building global church engagement. Well, of course, if you're invited to do that and you're given 15 minutes, that's 1-5, right? And that's almost when you think like, okay, they don't know what they're doing. Anyway, you want to be peaceful and you say, okay, let's try. So what I will do is I will focus. I will have to focus as much as possible, and I will focus on the involvement of Mennonites in the World Council of Churches. This World Council of Churches, as many of you may know, is consisting at this moment of 345 member churches from around the world and representing around 500 million Christians. So the Mennonite peace building in this World Council of Churches is probably a small voice, sometimes not even recognized, but still it is present in this worldwide movement. And I want to take you, before I take you a bit of that history, I want to start with two theses. Number one, the peace theology and the peace witness of the peace churches would not be the same today if it had not been developed in dialogue with the other churches. So it's about the influence of the others on the peace churches. And secondly, the engagement for peace and justice of the worldwide fellowship of churches would not be the same today if the peace churches had not been actively involved in the ecumenical movement. So this is about the peace churches on the others, the influence. I want to take you to some of the milestones of this ecumenical movement, very, very briefly, very superficially, of course, but just to draw some lines here in order to remind you of some of the things that have happened. The founding of the World Council of Churches in 1948. War is contrary to the will of God. That was the strong motivation and the consensus of the churches after the devastating experience of 2 world wars and the involvement of the churches in those wars. And some Mennonites joined this global church movement from the beginning. It was the Dutch Mennonites and the German Mennonites. They are among the founding members of the World Council of Churches. And they were the only Mennonite churches who would join at that moment. Over the decades, it was only the Mennonite community in Congo that has joined us as well. So the Mennonites were not the strongest peace churches in representation in this council, but there were other peace churches. It was the Quakers, the Friends, the Church of the Brethren, who have started that movement together with us Mennonites. And I must say, MCC, Mennonite Central Committee, to my knowledge, they have sent to every single assembly representatives. They have stayed in touch with this global ecumenical movement from the beginning. Not being an official member, of course, but being present and staying in touch. Now the Pidou conferences, some of you might know about these Pidou conferences, very, very famous, very rich in content, 1955 to 1973. It was the first General Secretary of the World Council of Churches, with the name Willem A. Wisserthoofd, a Dutchman, who challenged the peace churches to present their arguments for a pacifist position to the worldwide fellowship of churches. Since all other theologies seem to have failed preventing those devastating world wars. And the peace churches responded with a famous document titled "Peace is the Will of God." Note the change in phrasing it. It's not a negative phrase, it's a positive phrase. It became the initiation of a long and very rich, heated debate, sometimes between representatives of the small peace churches and the large traditions of state churches. Since the 16th century Reformation, Mennonites had not been challenged like this to defend and to propose their convictions on non-resistance. And it is here that we find the emergence of a very rich peace theology and the sharpening of all major ethical arguments against any participation of Christians in war. Especially when the younger churches from the global south were joining these conversations, it became even more complicated because the topic of revolutionary violence was an issue. Revolutionary violence against the injustices of colonialism. 1983, in this wonderful country, on the other side, Vancouver, the Sixth Assembly of the World Council of Churches, starting a conciliar process on justice, peace, and the integrity of creation. It is in this process that the churches altogether have learned to understand that a convincing peace witness cannot restrict itself to being against war or reducing the whole topic of peace to a controversy between peace churches and non-pacifist churches. Here we see a widening of the horizon for all of the churches, including us. Peace cannot be discussed without the question of justice. And both justice and peace are closely related to our self-understanding and our perspectives on nature. We are part of creation and not the lords of creation. We are called to be responsible housekeepers. The peace churches were challenged by this widening of the horizon as much as the other churches. Together, they continued to discuss the old questions within that new framework, following a methodology called a conciliar process, a peace witness in itself, I want to say. Jumping to the 8th Assembly of the World Council of Churches in Harare, Zimbabwe, 1998. The promise of a new era of peace after the end of the so-called Cold War between East and West, which of course, as we know, was a hot war in most parts of this world, did not become a reality. That promised peace did not become a reality. Another widening of the horizons of peace building was needed to challenge the whole range of experiences, different experiences of violence. Direct and personal violence, indirect and structural violence, cultural violence, and so on. People are killed even when there is no war. People are killed by criminal acts. People are killed by hunger. People are killed by domestic violence. People are killed by discrimination. People are killed by racism, and so on. Churches together were committing themselves here in Harare to overcome the spirit, logic, and practice of violence. That was one of the goals of this decade, to overcome violence. And Mennonites, being one of the smallest member churches of the World Council, had initiated this new approach. The Decade to Overcome Violence resulted in an international ecumenical peace convocation in Jamaica 2011. Throughout that first decade of the new millennium, churches witnessed additional and yet new challenges. For example, internationally operating terrorism and the so-called war on terror. And again, some of those old questions came back in a different manner. How to protect those who cannot protect themselves? Should we really say that military interventions are never appropriate? Witnessing a genocide in Rwanda. Again, it took the strong witness of the peace churches to prevent the mainline churches from falling back into their old way of reasoning for just war. Instead, the fellowship of churches moved on together in heated debates again to develop a comprehensive understanding of just peace, developing new ways of theological reflection, political reasoning, and practical conflict transformation. The 10th Assembly, the latest Assembly of the World Council of Churches, took place in Busan in South Korea, 2013. This latest Assembly chose as its general motto a prayer: God of life, lead us to justice and peace. The proposed centrality of peace and justice in this Assembly within a multi-religious context in Asia was one of the results of that previous decade to overcome violence. The Fellowship of Churches has learned that peace and justice are at the very heart of Christian faith and witness in this world. And accordingly, at that assembly in Busan, a new and overall programmatic approach has been chosen that should guide all future activities and reflections of the World Council of Churches: a pilgrimage of justice and peace. And in one of the workshops we will talk more about that. At least 3 insights need to be highlighted here. 1, the churches of that global fellowship are seeing more clearly now than ever before that building peace with justice is a journey of faith. It is a process of formation. Secondly, the churches are learning that they themselves need to walk the way of justice and peace. They have to become themselves communities of justice and peace if they want to be faithful disciples on the way of Jesus. And thirdly, the churches are committing themselves to explore the spiritual roots of just peace, in order to be transformed and to be empowered to walk that pilgrimage together. Now, Mennonites have been heavily involved in developing this programmatic approach, and we continue to be so. It is becoming this pilgrimage is becoming the guiding principle for this fellowship of churches at this very moment, inviting all people of goodwill to walk with us on the way of just peace. Now, to conclude, let me be a bit more precise about my thesis here. The peace theology and the peace witness of the peace churches would not be the same today. Sorry, I have to read from that slide, but I changed it. I learned myself while I was listening to myself, you know. The peace theology and the peace witness of the peace churches would not be as broad today if it had not been developed in dialogue with the other churches. And secondly, the engagement for peace and justice of the worldwide fellowship of churches would not be as central today if the peace churches had not been actively involved in that ecumenical movement. To conclude, my experience as a representative of that Mennonite voice within the World Council of Churches is that our voice is needed and it is appreciated. We are welcome at the ecumenical table. And on the other hand, there's so much to learn for us by walking with the others, since there's so much wisdom on peace building within the other traditions that we don't own yet. So to be a peace church obviously means to be ecumenical. Thank you very much.